Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forging Gender Equality, Break the Bias. This event, held in support of International Women's Day 2022, spotlights Ms Herry Cho, who joined SGX in February 2021 as its first managing director, head of sustainability and sustainable finance. She set up the first Singapore team in sustainable finance with global management responsibilities at ING and has played a key role in promoting green financing in the region. Moderating the discussion is Ms Esther, CDL Chief Sustainability Officer. Before we begin, for those joining us virtually, please take part in the session by sharing your comments or questions using the chat function. The session will last an hour and will be recorded and accessible on our CDL Sustainability YouTube page. Now let me hand the floor over to Esther. Esther, please.
Thank you. Hello, ladies. And happy International Women's Day, and so happy to see you in person. Want to give everyone a hug, yeah. So, and also welcome, for those who join us on Zoom. We're really happy to celebrate this special day with everyone here. So, of course, I'm really happy to have my good friend here, Harry, and thank you for making time for us. We've been planning this for almost a year, right? When you first joined SGX, I was saying that, hey, we should, catch up, then you can reflect on 1 year with SGX. So I actually first met Harry in 2016. When we were planning for, when CDL was trying to learn more from her about sustainable finance, and then we rolled out our first green bond in 2017. And I had a lot of respect for this young banker who has so much knowledge and is so friendly and all that. So, she actually have done a lot to shape the Asia-Pacific sustainable finance market and the international market standards as well. So in early 2021, you have assumed the role, to drive SGX sustainability and sustainable finance, and taking care of really important strategic direction and implementation of policies, to help Singapore to transition to a low carbon economy. Big role and tall order. So you have also assumed some very prestigious global appointment, and such as the finance sector expert group for Race to Zero and Race to Alliance as well, right? And then, which is actually an appointment by UNFCCC and high-level climate champions for climate action. In September, you became one of the first, 30 global executives selected to the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, or TNFD, as a task force member to set up disclosure framework by 2023. The list can go on and on for a whole day, so I'm not going to do that. But as a friend, as a business associate, your accomplishment is indeed very impressive. But what impressed me most is actually your personality and your emotional intelligence, So I always want to ask you this question. Actually, who, played that really, big role to shape who you are today? And would you see that is your upbringing or your cultural values that have impact on your ability to manage such huge portfolios of responsibility and also to stay calm?
Wow, I don't know where to begin with all that. Thank you, Esther, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the ladies for being here on Zoom as well. I'd really like today to be interactive as much as possible and see where stories resonate. And, I'm here learning as much as anyone, and day to day, this will follow through rest of our conversation today. But every day is a new day that's got something new that you have to get your head around and your mind around and your heart around to move forward. So if I then go back to what are some of the key defining features, if I can call that myself, that makes me who I am? Well, indeed, it has to go back to the years that you were shaped. And it sounds like such a cliche, but being a middle child goes a long way. You never got something for granted. You never take anything for granted. You had to be clear on what you wanted and ask for it. And over time, you learn what it means to not only ask for what you want, but what does what you want mean in the context of the community. So to put that into context, when I talk about community, it can mean so many different things. I had a really eclectic upbringing, so I grew up partially in, Asian Tiger, then also Western Europe as well as Eastern Europe, and spent chunky number of years in each of them, and went from sort of all, Korean school to all British girls, Christian school to a melting pot of international school with 40 different nationalities. And so again, my thought process as to what I thought I wanted and what I thought was the right thing had to constantly be challenged and adapted, because my environment was constantly changing, not because I wanted to, but what I found was, as a young girl and young woman, you run with it, and before you know it, you're adapting day by day, right? So that still features through completely to the core of who I am. There is never a constant in anything that we do, and that's especially true for sustainability. Like people who know me well know that my mantra is sustainability will be a journey. It's not an end destination, because that goalpost is continuously going to evolve as technology evolves, as policy evolves, etc. So, adaptability, being clear in what you want, but putting that into the context of the community and the ecosystem that you're operating in are probably some of the key defining points of how I operate.
Wow, yes, actually, which reminded me that, after 20 years on this sustainability journey, I'm still learning every day, and there's so much to learn, And would you say that, your love for sustainability, is born or made? Was there any moment, it's like, wow, okay, I must develop my career as a sustainability professional, as a banker to drive sustainable finance, or is that just a natural progression in your journey?
So again, I think what you're exposed to, whether you intended that to be your journey. So I truly believe that the right events and right pathway will appear at the right time if you sincerely believe that it does. That it will, and for me certainly that has been the case. Whether it was having been fortunate to immerse in nature when growing up, or whether that's sea or a park or mountains, or also from career perspective, I was a generalist banker at some point doing mergers and acquisitions, and I covered everything from mining to power, which included coal-fired power plants, to TMT, technology, media technology, and infrastructure, etc. But what always resonated with me in terms of what I was working on were projects like renewable energy or related to water infrastructure. And I didn't really know why, except that I was like, this seems like the next new thing. But at that point, I categorized it into the same bucket as technology, for example, from TMT, like new evolution. Fast forward a few years, I really had a moment where, again, this goes back to do you know who you are, right? And that who you are is constantly changing. But I decided to go deep inside and say, things are going well, but is this who I am? Am I true today? Will it be true tomorrow? Is it true it clearly was true yesterday, but is it true today? Is it true tomorrow? And if there isn't this congruence, then what should I do about it? And there came a point in my career where I just realized I need to find purpose. And so that led to taking time out, actually. So, some people say, out of everything that you've done, what I'm most impressed about was the fact that you threw in the towel and said you're going, you're leaving. But as things go, when you give your all, and that's another sort of key thing, if you always give your 120%, people see that, people recognize that. And they didn't let me go. They said, just go on unpaid leave quietly, and we'll have a new role for you when you come back. So anyway, so going on that journey, just going really deep into nature again. So again, without knowing, I was drawn to things that would allow me to find my path. So being in nature, being in the Amazonian jungles, being in areas and countries where that degradation of both environment and Like social inequality was just so blatant in your face. And then again, going deep inside, these were some of the defining moments that made me think, okay, I think I know the direction I have to go. And then how you implement that is a whole new game.
So actually, I want to ask about your ups and downs in your career, but look like your career is always, on the uptrend rather than down. And could I summarize it as actually you were a little bit like, keeping too occupied when you were in the bank, and a little bit of like time for reflection, and then therefore you just went off, to find peace in nature. And then, that was the time that you decided to switch to the public sector?
By the way, SGX is not public sector. I should clarify that. It's a private sector institution. So indeed, when you're running, and when you're a young woman and you're out there partying, work hard, play hard. I truly did. I was living in Hong Kong at the time. And, sort of Lang Kwai Fong and that area was playground after hours, right? Whether that be 9 p.m., 10 p.m., or even midnight sometimes, right, with your group of friends. But again, if you have a yearning for something, you should listen to that. And that's what I was trying to listen to. Like there was this yearning to say, you're fitting in well in this environment, but if it's not resonating with you somehow, what is it? What is it? Don't judge, just be kind to that thought. And then so if you go down the path of discovery, it could lead you that direction. Now, from career perspective, I'd have to go all the way back to the first thing I said, which is if you continue to cultivate yourself, then, or for me, when I go on journey to continue to cultivate myself, the process of understanding whether I'm on the right path or not, or whether I'm doing something that's on the right track, it becomes clearer in shorter periods of time. And you really feel it from deep inside, And so when I think about next steps, joining Singapore Exchange as well, in sustainability today and ESG in general, there's no wrong place to be. Let's start with that. But then when I went back to what I was doing, so I was in banking before, I felt with my skill set, with who I am, if I could be in a role that could have a bigger systemic impact, that is where I can potentially contribute more. Okay? And so then when the Singapore Exchange role came along, of course there was mutual due diligence, etc., but it made a lot of sense. And going into a new business, after 13 plus years in a company during COVID, new environment, arguably different type of a culture. It's not easy, but the important thing was to sort of still gather that group of support behind you for a new department, a new thing that was being set up. Not that Singapore Exchange hadn't been doing sustainability, it had for a long time, like mandatory disclosures for sustainability came in 2016 already, right? So it's been on a journey for a while, but to take it to the next level, to get that buy-in, just really had to go deep inside to understand short-term, mid-term, long-term, is this the right step? And then get the right buy-in for it as well.
Well, over the last few years, sustainability has really exploded into the mainstream, right? When you talk about ESG investing, sustainable finance, and all that. And in fact, actually, financial sector are the one who's really driving, accelerating all the changes happened, over the last couple of years, net to zero. We have all the net zero alliance, by bankers, by insurers, by asset owners. So I think this is something very exciting. So, I hear you that you say definitely, with your financial knowledge and background and with SGX position, but in order to transform SGX ecosystem into a world-class and a trusted multi-asset sustainable exchange, it's no mean feat. So do you have a plan? what will be the, opportunities that you think you can play this role, and what are the likely challenges that do you have a pathway or a plan to, to overcome all these challenges?
The first is a roadmap. There will have to be roadmap whenever there is sustainability. There is no silver bullet for anything, unfortunately. So first of all, to help an organization face the same direction, it's a matter of repetition, by the way, over months and years, you had to set a common vision, where are we all driving towards? And that was to be a leading sustainable and credible transition finance and trade hub to reflect this multi-asset nature of the organization. And then because you're an exchange, and by definition, then you're at the heart of the ecosystem. And there are many different roles that an exchange plays. Like, for example, there is a regulatory function which operates at very strict Chinese wall to the business side, because an exchange is still a business, right? You have to be answering, in this case, SGX is also a listed company. And so we've got shareholders to answer to. And then at the heart of it all, because you're at the heart of that ecosystem, there's an ecosystem to truly understand. It's not about an exchange setting the agenda all the time. It's about listening, what is needed, what are you hearing from the market, and taking it into concrete initiatives to, incrementally or sometimes exponentially transform over time. So then the few lenses, when we think about the ecosystem, we can't do it alone. So there's significant amount of capacity building that goes on. And it's not just about teaching about local inputs or local information. I mean, Singapore Exchange, we have about 40% of the equity markets. It's actually international, not Singapore-based. And more than 85% of bonds, those are actually international issuers too. So when we talk about our ecosystem, it's already very international. So taking those perspectives into account is important, including in the capacity building. So TCFD training 101, 102 that we did last year, we had IFC and CDSB, which is a reporting standard, and the Sustainable Stock Exchange partner with us to roll that out. And we had, 2,000 plus attendees, all the way from chairmen of LISCOs to companies and financiers and lawyers, you name it, they were there. But also, some of the journey we have to go on, it is so complex and it's so systemic that no one particular entity, let alone a person, right, know all the answer. And so in particular, something like decarbonization pathway, linked to that, right? The nexus with nature, the nexus with social, as this starts to get a lot more measurable, quantitative, and technical in nature, you need various parties to come together, right? So then as part of ecosystem, we believe that it's our job to help pull together the different parties. So, this net zero the net zero, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero is an example where there's asset owners, asset managers, banks, insurers, exchanges, credit rating agencies, auditors, etc., who have all come together, who have committed to a net zero pathway, and then collectively trying to figure out what does decarbonization mean for the world, for a sector, and for a region, because the environment is different. So that's environment, so the ecosystem is one. Now, there's multiple levers to pull. We're so lucky that our regulation unit colleagues, the RECO, they were already, thinking ahead to have implemented sustainability reporting in 2016. And we worked together to launch the climate-related disclosure as a mandatory piece, right? So there's carrots and sticks, but then you can't just release the stick without carrots. So that's why we're trying to do the capacity building, but also releasing tools, leveraging on data. So there's another project called Genome, which actually already has done the work to identify 27 key indicators that cut across different reporting standards, frameworks, and certain ESG rating indicators. And so then how do we make this easy for investors and other stakeholders to access, right? So projects like that. And ultimately, embedding sustainability into each of the asset classes is so important, right? So whether that be sustainable bond or, what does a equity in transition mean? What does green equity mean? Importantly, it's not just about green. It's not about what's already green or what's already very social impact. It's about that transition we need to undergo. So embedding some of that, working with knowledge partners, these are all part of the journey that's going to be multi-year for sure. But we have to set the right milestones and the right foundation in place. And I think we're getting there in terms of that foundation setting.
Well, actually, in the audience, we have a lot of experts here, whether it's a financial women or, S&P Dow Jones people, and a lot of them. And Net Zero, we have our sustainable energy expert, we have C40, we have Resilient City Network, we have a lot of people here. So ladies, if you want to, please get your question ready. I will ask one more question, then we probably, have some exchange of the heavy topics first before we go into the, women executive, subjects. So just now you talk about some of the acronym already. It's like TCFD, GRI, a science-based target, and CDSB, and then the list go on and on and on, that actually really keep a lot of us, having sleepless night. And the net zero is really the biggest, stress for all of us, especially like my team, we actually pledged to, commit to net zero carbon according to World Green Building Council's framework since February, so almost 1 year now. You can see my dark circle, the eye circle. Actually, every now and then when we see net zero, it's like, oh no. How can we do it? New developments or existing buildings is really very, very challenging. And how to set target, track performance, and reporting, which is very, challenging. I still remember in 2016, we were roped in to talk to some of the listed company, and we become the best, the punching bag. So it's just Esther, I am not CDL. Just tell me what is by law. So like, okay. So, but today, I think the scenario has changed. A lot of people just tell us how we can do better. So I think just now what you saw, you described the journey is quite interesting. And before I share the mic with the audience, I will ask one more question about the TNFD, okay, and which is quite related to CIX, which is your Climate Impact X, which is actually supporting nature-based projects to offset carbon footprint with carbon credits. So how do you relate the two, or is there anything, it's just like, I think it is really the roadmap. You can see that from 2016, reporting become like report or explain. And then, and even all the way to, TCFD, the last year where SGX launched the new standard with like, the 6 on the wish list. And even at Glasgow, we saw your launch of CIX. And of course, our government did a very good job, to complete the mission of Article 6 and the carbon market. And I can actually see all these stars are being aligned now. So maybe you can share a little bit of behind the scene, what is it like for the year ahead? How businesses can prepare ourselves?
Okay, so there is actually so much focus on decarbonization and in particular climate change mitigation, right? Which is the net zero and the real hard slog that needs to be done by real economy companies like real estate companies or energy companies or steel companies or shipping companies. These are real capex and real strategic direction that has to be made. So I would say that needs to continue, but it really cannot be seen just because there's so much focus on it, and there'll be more and more of this coming out. Climate change mitigation does not exist in isolation. It will be inevitably in real life as well as the frameworks the framework on how to think about it is going to be a nexus. What I mean by that is, we are all wearing this SDG or global goals. The brooch. So if you look at just 17 goals, there are 17 goals for a reason. It's just that many of them are not as well articulated. There hasn't been as much government focus in many ways because they weren't so easy to measure. If there were two things, if I had to just pinpoint as to where the nexus is going to be very, very important, and what's now sort of up and coming, nature is definitely one of them. And it can't be seen in isolation. There's a lot of good work that's already been done by many, many institutions already, by the way. But how to take that to the next level of how the world came together on the climate. And there are things like COP15 in Kunming, which is supposed to be coming, although it's slightly delayed to September. And what we learned from climate is that you cannot succeed in what you don't measure or don't know. And that's where disclosure really came into focus, for disclosure around your carbon footprint and carbon intensity, etc. So similar thing is going to happen over time with nature only. We should create that as a nexus with the journey that practitioners are already on, because that journey that people are on already is already so like overwhelming, right? If you try to mainstream it, even more so, try to get your CFO to get their head around TCFD for one, but TNFD as well, right? The Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure is about, and it hasn't launched yet, it's another couple years at least before it gets launched. But the idea is to look at nature holistically from financial risk perspective and financial opportunities perspective, and what's actually needed to be disclosed. So governance, strategy, identification of risk, identification of the risk mitigation strategies, future-looking scenario planning, future-looking metrics and targets. What should they be? And there's a special focus on what is that nexus with climate and what is some of the materiality points. And this cuts across sectors, by the way. So that whole nature piece is going to be coming in the next 2 to 3 years, I would say. I mean, look out for TNFD and, other good work other institutions are doing, like WWF or CDP or the science, instead of the SBTI, there's SBTN now as well, which is trying to look at future target setting for nature as well. So complex, nature is far more complex than just looking at climate change mitigation isolation, but they all have to sort of fit together. By the way, TNFD the executive director is coming in April to visit. So we are going to be running some events to share the first beta framework and to sort of socialize it with the market and get inputs. The other key side, which is not new by far, but is getting a lot technical now and getting some order in place, is social. And one key development I can highlight is the social taxonomy, which has just been launched by the technical expert group of the European Commission's the overall plan for taxonomies, right? And it will have quite similar structure to green taxonomy. It will have, for example, substantial contribution to a social objective, whether that be decent workplace or equal sort of opportunities for all. So they're very sort of defined objectives. And what could be some areas where there could be harm in nexus with green economy that we're driving towards. So for example, which are the vulnerable groups as green transition happens, like those who are in sectors that are more vulnerable to transition risk. And so then how do we ensure that they don't lose jobs overnight? And those population in particular gets retrained and retooled. And by the way, this is what Singapore government is fantastic at, right? So all these things are going to move in tandem and in nexus, and climate change cannot be seen in isolation.
Great. I'm not checking where to go for dinner. There are questions coming in from Zoom already. Yeah. So, but I give you the priority first, those who are here in person. Do you have any question first? Anyone? Okay. Cheryl, hi. Yeah, the mic behind you.
Testing? Okay. Thanks, Esther, and thanks, Harry, for your very inspirational career and sharing as well. I have a question around, you mentioned ecosystem. Can you share a bit more about the collaborative as well as the competitive landscape with other stock exchanges or other kind of cross-sector collaboration to build the ecosystem?
Sure. So as in any sector, there are frenemies, right? But you know, especially when it comes to sustainability, the task at hand is so big that there is recognition that you can't do it in isolation. So I'll give you a couple examples where collaborations are clearly happening. One is in that net zero journey of exchanges, recognizing the fact that there is this. I mean, one of the biggest impacts that exchanges can have is by working together with the ecosystem, right? So when it comes to net zero pathways, there is now what's called Net Zero Financial Services Providers Alliance, under which is an exchange group. Now, there is a small group of founding members still. So there's only 6 of us, but that's going to grow in the next 2. I can imagine it's sort of catapulting. Why did we join as a founding member, one of the 2 founding members globally? Because we recognize that we have to not only prepare ourselves for capturing opportunities, but to future-proof our markets, right? So we wanted to be in the driving seat, setting the agenda, you know, and then sharing knowledge and ideas with other exchanges to see where should we all be collectively moving together. So that's one key aspect, defining what does net zero product mean for an exchange, right? How should we be enabling the market as exchanges so that there is some level of synchronicity and, you know, not every single exchange is coming up with a different standard, right? Another example is around disclosure. So right now, every exchange around the world has their own sort of system or regulation or no regulation. You know, there are certain standards that some ascribe, some do not, etc. So whilst respecting the different ecosystem and the local jurisdictional differences of different exchanges, at least in ASEAN, under the ASEAN Exchanges sort of CEOs forum that has been ongoing for many years already, there is now a sustainability working group that's been set up. And one of the key things that made sense to look at is a comparison of the disclosure regimes on sustainability of the different exchanges. And also we collectively reached out to our investors to see how do you see ASEAN sort of listed entities or, you know, exchanges work on block? You know, what are some of the key pain points or some indicators that you want to see? And given that quite a number of exchanges had done their homework already of looking at what is disclosed already in their markets and what are potentially the more material aspects of what should be disclosed in their markets, this is now sort of being looked at holistically to see is there some way where we can signal to the market of not necessarily harmonized frameworks, but unity in the way that we are cognizant of what each other is doing. Yeah.
Great. I have this very long question. I tried to simplify it a little bit, right? Greenwashing is a term that has been really commonly used nowadays, and you know, pertaining to like accounting and funding for fossil fuels. You know, and this participant asked about like how do we, ensure a total systemic change in all the industries, and funding needs to go to the organizations that are really doing good and resolving root causes, you know, of climate crisis, be it like chemical industry, pharmaceuticals, and oil and gas and all that. There's one particular question about like, would SGX be working with World Federation of Engineering Organization and Institute of Engineers Singapore, since engineers and scientists will be key drivers for sustainable technologies and industry 4.0 and eventually 5.0. So systemic change and also technology. And also how do we ensure funding, to the right company and overcoming, greenwashing.
So, I mean, broad brush answer. When any of us are working on sustainability or ESG in general, that internal compass of whatever metric you use, is this having impact in the real economy, right? Is this really having an impact? And what I mean by that is, it is possible to actually change a financial portfolio without having a real world impact by just simply divesting something, right? And that sort of ownership goes to somebody else. Now that in itself can be a tool and a statement, but if there's too many other investors or pockets of capital who do not make that distinction, are you having an impact? So that's one thing, right, when it comes to greenwashing. And this is being built into regulation now. France actually has laws against greenwashing. And there's a key focus on, in particular, funds that's going to be set up. So regulation, and it's already happening in EU and here as well, by the way. Here, Taiwan, Thailand, and a few other jurisdictions in Asia where the regulators really understood that for a fund to be labeled as green or social or sustainable or ESG, whatever, what are the bases under which it's being called that, right? And then sort of making that more transparent and verifiable. It's a good step. At the same time, we also recognize that data that's needed to verify those components are also, especially in Asia Pacific, not there. Simply just not there in many instances. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg. So that's why it's important to move on the things like disclosure, data, and sort of more information related innovation at the same time as recognizing is any action that's being taken, whether you're financing your company, actually contributing to a key environmental or social objective that you have identified as a company or a person to be what you're contributing towards, right? And so that's a little bit more of a general answer. Specifically, the second question that you asked, which was engineers.
Technology.
Yes, so keeping in mind that an exchange is where things like companies get listed, and so it's like a security that gets traded, which is either equity or fixed income, or funds like exchange traded funds. So yes, absolutely agree. Engineers, super duper important, but it probably will manifest more in the concept of these engineers working on the real technologies that needs to develop over time, and that which gets embedded into companies. So then it would be our role, right? To see how do we actually ensure that there is highest valuation that can be gained by companies who are working on this with people like engineers who must be working on these. So how do we actually create an ecosystem again, whether it be more analysts, equity analysts who will be covering companies in particular who are contributing towards a decarbonization or green economy, or how do we ensure that we try to garner funds or investors who recognize that there is this virtual cycle of ecosystem in Singapore and want to actually invest in companies here. They trust what gets listed on the exchange, right? They like the fact that there's high standards and trust, etc. So how do we leverage on that such that these companies can get the best out of things? Now, specifically to engineers, when it comes to decarbonization, which is quite then concrete, there are these things called marginal abatement cost curves. And there are aspects in every sector now. Of course, the science is still being tied down, but there is the decarbonization and carbon impact curves as well, or like flow diagrams. So what it means is in the marginal abatement cost curve, when you look at a certain sector and trying to understand what are some of the capex or projects or technologies that need to be deployed, then you sort of come up with a cost curve. By the way, this is how like power gets deployed, right? There's this long run marginal cost, short run marginal cost that determines which type of power gets sort of fired at which time of the day. So it's similar concept, but focusing on maximum decrease and cost of that. So it's a balance. And then when I talk about decarbonization impact curves, for each technology, what is the sort of incremental decrease in CO2 that particular project or technology brings in a sector over time? And so the two sort of have to be married. So my key advice to engineers is, please continue the good work you're doing, only just let us all work together to tie it back to how it can be financed and how it makes sense economically. And of course, the concept of economy is changing in sustainable development as well.
Wow, okay, this is a really heavy subject that we may take another one whole week of workshop. So I think when you talk about sustainability, climate change and all that, the science is very clear. So now it is really the art of engaging people, even the technologies, the economy and all that. So much for the heavy going subject. So today we are here because we celebrate our International Women's Day. So there's one question that will probably help us to, move to the next session. And this question is, how do you measure your own progress, and, how will you know that you have succeeded in your position in the past 1 year? And what personal goals do you have for your impact? And which actually link quite well to the next questions, that I want to talk about is like, okay, the theme of this year of IWD is break the bias, right? And actually a recent survey actually just released last month, only February, and show that over 74% of women executives that involved in this survey feels that there is actually gender inequality at workplace, and the vote is actually higher amongst young people, young women from 18 to 24 years old. So while you reflect on your progress this year, and can you also share that in your working experience in different countries, cities and all that from different sector, do you feel that personally that there's still a gender inequality in our workplace?
I mean, before thinking about am I woman or male or whatever I may be, I'm a person to start. And again, for me personally, and it really depends on the situation people are in and the environment they're in, of course. But just going back to my own experience as a young woman who always was sort of thrown into an ecosystem that I'm not familiar with, or social or work context that I'm not familiar with, I would say try to that there is definitely increasing, and thanks to so much good work that's been done by so many women in this room as well, by the way, there's quite a bit of push now to say gender equality, and in other parts of the world it goes way beyond gender, right? So there can be sometimes even positive biases, like, even in things like opportunities given to speak on stages, so to put spotlight, panel is like so frowned upon now, like a panel made up of only men, right? And so, seize that opportunity, because there is more and more recognition, including in Asia, including at board levels, as to how to ensure that there is that balance. Now, so then on the flip side, how can we just trying to think about what is helpful rather than victimizing ourselves, right? There are quite a number of work streams by now to try to upskill women and help to position them. And I'll talk about the more senior levels first, trying to ensure there's more board representation. I do hear that indeed still there are biases towards those who are a bit more proven, i.e. who are already in the roles, not necessarily giving new opportunities to women. But this sort of skew towards ensuring that there is balance, and that balance goes beyond gender, as I said. That is there's only one way that's going to continue. So, we should understand what are those movements that's going on in our ecosystem, identify what is the help we can get, and help ourselves as much as we can. Now, the comment that I'm actually somewhat surprised to also read that there is the younger women actually felt more bias. So, I think I would also love to hear more about the younger women who actually experienced that as well. And, what we can also collectively do to ensure that kind of, sentiments don't exist anymore. Because actually, if you look at workforce entering, like the younger you are, the percentage is more even, right? It sort of changes over time. So what is making young women actually feel like they're not giving the right opportunities? Is it concrete aspects that we can try to resolve? I think that's a really good discussion point as well.
Certainly. Yesterday on the IWD, actually UN Secretary Mr. Antonio Guterres actually made this statement that we need more women environment ministers and business leaders, presidents and prime ministers. And women can push countries to address the climate crisis, develop green jobs, and build a more just and sustainable world. How do you, relate to this statement, and how do you think that we can actually do better, whether it's the public sector, private sector, to help nurture more female, leaders and to take on a bigger role? And how do we really strike a balance? Sometimes, you always hear people say, oh, burnout, stressful, So even from young people, so how do we help them to strike that balance between, happiness and success, And you are one of the most positive person. I never really see you lose your cool and all that. So your role is really huge. So how do you maintain that calmness, and how do you think that you can help the younger executive to become a better leader? Is it because of confidence issues or is it competence issues?
I think there's two key things that can really help. So, it's probably true to say that women are empathetic, right? Men are too, of course. But it's one of the aspects to be able to relate and truly try to put ourselves into shoes of the other. And that's actually, in my view, key to getting consensus, because the bigger a project is, the bigger a role is, the bigger change a particular decision is driving. There are more and more and more people who this will have to get a level of agreement on. So being empathetic, you can be saying the same thing, but in different ways. And sort of ensuring you're bringing people along by truly trying to understand where is that, celebrating the fact that there are differences in opinion, right? But, and respecting that, but at the same time, seeing how can that perspective be respected, at the same time trying to go towards a common goal. So empathy, to truly put oneself into shoes of another is very important in sustainability in particular. Now, the second component, I think one of the aspects that we can help ourselves the most, sustainability is, at the end of the day, super technical. It is content overload. You can do full degrees on this, not that they're even there yet, but it is super technical and super cutting edge. Anything that's being created in the academic sort of arena is being implemented straight away, right? That speed of change is enormous. And so whatever role you're in, to truly see, have you done everything you can to ensure that you're actually making your decisions on as well-informed basis as possible, right? So educate yourself, and educate yourself, whether that be in school or people that you know who know more about a certain topic. But let me just say again, sustainability and sustainable development, as we systemize this further, this is going to become more and more technical. So the more you get up the curve on the technical knowledge, which will have to be incremental, by the way, otherwise it's too overwhelming. Take it step at a time. You know, learn the basics, and then learn the advanced technical knowledge, and then using empathy, learn how to apply it, right? So this will apply whether that's at environmental minister level or leadership level, or even at fresh graduate level, or even at student level. So yeah.
We have about last 5 to 6 minutes because we started a little bit late. I see a hand there. Lauren, yeah. Let's have a little chat before we wrap it up in about 5-6 minutes. Lauren, hi.
Hi, Esther. Thank you. And thank you, Harry, for your reflections. It was music to my ears earlier to hear you referencing the SDGs and the social and human aspects. SGX in many ways stands out as an actor in coalitions like Net Zero Finance because of the role in the region, and also because Singapore, because of its size, because of its geography, is really a climate taker. It's not a climate maker, right? So I guess my question is, in terms of that regional role in vulnerability, right? We know that Asia Pacific is the most vulnerable region to climate impacts. What do you see as the future in terms of mobilizing the kinds of adaptation finance, which is still a massive gap, and the kind of risk management and insurance and resilience finance opportunities that really Asia uniquely needs?
Yeah, that's a really big question and a very, very pertinent one. And whilst we are, we have a long way to go, I think the right frameworks are now being put in place. What I mean by that is when we now start to price in risk of transition due to not taking action, whether that be explicitly from things like carbon price, carbon tax, and even here in Singapore, the price direction is clear, right? It's going to exponentially grow over time. So aspects like this, where risk is now being priced into sort of what is the net off, right? If you don't take action, that should actually lead to some of the adaptation changes. Furthermore, I mentioned about the MAC curve, right? The marginal abatement cost curve. Guess what? It turns out that some of the adaptation aspects, so some of the much more cost-effective aspects when you think about sustainable development holistically, it's just that, that framework, that concept, when the financing of that relied on revenue that gets generated from an asset class, that was the main driver. It was very hard to deploy financing into adaptation aspects. But as we now price in externalities, and that's happening with carbon, it will happen once the community has worked together to come up with potential metrics and standards and what it means to not take action. What are the risks and how do you mitigate them for things like nature or social, right? These are all tied together. The more that these kind of, the risk of not taking action gets priced over time, the more there will be impetus to take action. And there's more call than ever, by the way, especially when it comes to the finance side, for the public sector and the private sector and the in-between organizations like multilateral development institutions to work together. Nothing new there. But, especially when it comes to decarbonization, I think there's now real recognition that nothing really can move unless the three connect. And so I think that's where I think adaptation will see most benefit, with things being priced in, actors now more systemically working together, reconfiguring the strategy of the institution, all the MDBs, like Asia Development Bank, IFC, they're all now setting net zero targets, if not already set. So can you imagine what that's changing to their overall way that they're going to be deploying financing into emerging market countries, which is their mandate? That's what's happening today.
Wow, thank you so much. But I think, we hope that when you talk about sustainability, we don't scare away some of the SME.
I'm sorry.
So some of the, we come across some of the younger executives, so they are really getting a little bit nervous about all the big jargons and the acronym and all that. I think definitely the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action now. Okay, the business case has never been stronger. So I think the art of communicating sustainability integrations to convince more to come on board, that is the art of sustainability comms. So I think let's go back to our today's event, that it is really to celebrate women and young executives. And I really appreciate, Harry, for sharing so much, from the personal life to your career life, and also your, the in-depth understanding of the subject. And but I want to just wrap it up, and thanks everyone. And actually, I also want to share a couple of messages, which is actually from a journal that. Thanks to Harry share with me with this very enlightening Christmas present. And I'm still reading it, and I was trying to, I'm going to start this 5-minute journal, very soon after my 15th report is rolled out by 31st March. So there are 2 messages from this journal. It's called a 5-minute journal. The first one is, those who don't believe in magic will never find it. So, women love to dream, right? Women love to imagine things, right? So women executives should always stay curious and about all the changes around us or ahead of us, and have confidence in yourself and look beyond the present and innovate to turn possibility to realities. And the second message from this little journal, this is so magical, is like, get out of your comfort zone and take action and make magic happen. So this is really for the younger executives, and have the courage to let your voice and your presence fall. Sometimes when you walk into a meeting surrounded by a lot of guys, don't feel intimidated. Knowledge is power. Prepare yourself and present yourself with confidence. So like Harry, when I first met her, she was this young banker, but her knowledge really blew me away. So let's all stay positive, whether IWD or not, and let's break the bias and help the younger executives around you, and let's all turn aspirations to action and contribute to a better and more equitable and sustainable future for men or women. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Harry.